Welcome, Fantastic Friends, to the new episode of the Fancast at 4 podcast, the number one Fantastic Four fancasting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
I'd say existentially. I'm Dan Bettenhausen, and I'm your only host this week as Jack is on a well-deserved vacation. In the meantime, we can still venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. With Matt Shakman set to direct the MCU's Fantastic Four films, we still can explore what it would be like if a different director was behind the camera, and who might they cast. This week, we're very excited to have a first-time guest who is also the co-creator and host of the What the Show YouTube channel, Mike Deacon. Mike, so glad you could be here. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself and What the Show?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. So I started What the Show podcast with my co-creator, AJ Lancaster, back in 2020. We kind of collaborated during the lockdown phase, when a lot of people over the internet really met each other because we were all sitting at home and doing a lot of Zoom meetings and things of that nature. AJ and I discovered we had a very clickable sense of humor, and we decided to start a YouTube channel, which took us a little while to get rolling. And ironically, our first two guests were Justin the Juice and my now wife, Bethany Carl at the time, Deacon now. And the two of them just worked with us so well that within the first month, we decided that was going to be our core four. We've been going ever since. And we actually have our show is all over the map. We do all sorts of crazy stuff. You never know what you're going to get with us. We do a little bit of everything, whatever we feel like doing, we do. But one of the biggest core tenets of our show is that we do everything for charity. That all started. The first things first, with Kevin Smets when they were doing Smash Cancer, we decided let's donate all of our Streamlabs for the next 2 weeks or whatever it was to that cause. And then we had Paul Preston from the Movie Guys on, who sponsors a scholarship in the legacy of his past wife, Karen Volpe. And we were just like, this feels right. And we've done it ever since. So we're going on 3 years now, and lots of great causes have gotten donations. We get various amounts. Our numbers are up and down in every which way possible, but we've always said that our show does not deserve it to make any money, so anything we do make, we put towards the good cause.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing about it, is that it's not for personal fame or YouTube glory. It's right to have fun and to hopefully do a little good with it. And I certainly appreciate the couple of times I've been on there, especially as the Scrubs trivia contestant.
Yeah.
Much less Scrubs trivia winner here. Not to pat myself on the back a little bit. Yes, defending champion. But yeah, no, it's a great time. So I do recommend you all go check out What the Show. With Mike introduced, let us take an opportunity to introduce the director we will be discussing. This week, we are featuring an American film director, screenwriter, comedian, and actor who also runs his own production company. He has been behind the camera for some of the most popular, albeit dated, comedies of the early 2000s. Many of his films feature adult characters stuck in their immaturity or other life hang-ups, and later, characters dealing with their own midlife crises. This week, we're discussing Judd Apatow. Mike, what else comes to mind to you when you think about Judd Apatow?
I think a lot of it, what you said right there, like the state of being in an arrested development as a human being and or the midlife crisis, 100%. And I'm going to go into that when we go into the pitch. But Judd Apatow is very irreverent, but grounded. Like all of his movies, and this is what made me like kind of attracted to the name, because his directorial style and the way he writes does not necessarily lead you to think superheroes in any way, shape, or form. And some of his work, it hit me at the right time. I was in college at the time that most of his college or just out of college when his big hits happened, like when his TV show, when Freaks and Geeks and Undeclared were on television. I was in college, and then right after that, when the first two movies we're going to discuss, that's me in my early 20s. Those movies spoke to me very loudly at that point in time. Obviously various degrees of what holds up, and definitely we'll talk about that in a second, especially with one of them. But
I agree with you. I think to his credit, when he writes, a lot of his lead characters are very endearing. They have a lot of heart.
Mm-hmm.
While they have their flaws, they're not necessarily people you want to root against,
Right.
which I appreciate. Though the point about him being dated, especially some of his earlier ones and probably his more popular ones,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of homophobic and sexist language that may not fly today with the more popular comedies, at least not in an educated or smart enough way that they can get away with the language that they use.
He would have to
Grant,
go about it a different way if he wanted to go with that kind of
right.
humor.
Right. With that said, there's still a lot of great stuff in these movies that we're going to talk about, but I felt it would be a disservice not to mention that there is a datedness to some of them based on
Oh yeah.
some of the jokes that have been used, especially directed at the LGBTQ plus community and women in general.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the four movies that we picked today, the first two, which are the oldest of them, definitely have their moments that will, you know, if somebody hadn't seen them before today, they'd be like, "What did he just say?"
Right. Right. Well, I think that is a good segue to get into our first segment, Four Fantastic Films. Here we will discuss four films directed by Judd Apatow. Let's kick off with what is probably the most notable one. It came out in 2005, and that is the Steve Carell led 40-Year-Old Virgin. Mike, I'll turn it over to you. What do you think about 40-Year-Old Virgin?
This movie is, in ways, holds up. For those who don't know, this movie is actually largely responsible for the success of The Office. Because The Office first season was not really a hit, and Steve Carell came out, and they had this 40-Year-Old Virgin was actually a very, very big hit when it got into theaters. It had legs. It ran for almost the whole summer. This movie's main character, which is Steve Carell playing Andy, is actually very endearing. There are moments that are, you know, a little bit troublesome with him, but it's kind of like almost Michael Scottish in that he is so like fish out of water in a lot of circumstances that he doesn't know what's going on because he is just so sheltered. But at the same time, he's the kind of guy you root for. He's the kind of guy that a lot of people, especially in our movie space, can relate to, especially like he has all his action figures that are all you know,
Oh, yeah.
pristine mitten box and all of that. And he's just the kind of guy who's just socially awkward. I really like him as a character as a whole. This movie does have a very nice ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Paul Rudd and Seth Rogen play off each other fantastically in this movie. And as is going to be a recurring theme today, Leslie Mann has a very, very memorable and funny, ridiculous scene in this movie. But the 40-Year-Old Virgin, I think, you know, when it comes down to Judd Apatow's overall legacy, is probably, if you were to pick one movie, the one that he would probably be remembered for.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And I think as far as the lead goes, Andy is probably the least problematic part of the film. I think it's his buddies who he works with that kind of tend to the datedness and the jokes. The you know how I know you're gay kind of
that scene,
more or less harmless, all things considered, but you know, even still, probably not something done today.
Right.
I think Catherine Keener is great as the love interest, as the very kind of sex positive hot grandma, quoting the film. Yeah, no, I think very strong. And I think you touched on most of it, Mike. I'm trying to think of any other memorable. Oh, the waxing scene. I think we can't forget the Kelly Clarkson. Like that was on how many advertisements and TV spots for the movie.
It still is. If you watch montages of the 2000s, that scene is going to live forever.
Well, and what's incredible is it was real. Like it was actually done, you know. So credit to Steve Carell for doing it, and I have to imagine those were legitimate reactions. Those were not
they said
reactions.
It's not scripted. Like when he yelled, Kelly Clarkson, like that's how he reacted to it. So
even better.
Makes it even better. Yeah.
And yeah, the end with the Age of Aquarius, so out of left field, but still just a perfect button on the entire movie. I think Jane Lynch is another unsung hero in the movie
as the boss.
Yes,
and Michael McDonald constantly being on in the store is a fantastic running gag.
Oh, just at the beginning when Paul Rudd's character is like, "I will literally blow my brains out if you don't stop Michael McDonald." And I also think Kat Dennings is very endearing as Catherine Keener's daughter as well, especially when Andy takes Marla to like the health clinic and it does all the stuff to make her not feel so bad about being a virgin herself. And you have the kid next to him like joking about his dick size, and like the dad's like, "You have a small penis." Very, very sweet scene and a very nice scene to kind of connect those two characters as well. So all in all, yes, it's probably his first big hit and probably the one that will be ultimately his legacy.
His legacy film. That's the perfect way to put it.
But that's not to say the next ones we're going to talk about are bad. So let's jump ahead a couple years and go to Knocked Up. So I watched all of these in the last couple days to prepare. I forgot how much I like this movie. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, some dated jokes, especially when it comes to homophobia, sexism, but really, this is such a sweet movie. You have another doof of a lead in Seth Rogen, and I think Katherine Heigl's pretty great in this as well. I think their chemistry is very surprising, whether it should be or not, but I like the dynamic that both Heigl and Rogen are able to play off each other in this having a baby movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Heigl is weird. So she's the straight woman in this, which is a lot of rom-coms don't tend to go that way. So it was a little refreshing to see that. But Seth Rogen is somebody who it was perfect for this particular role. Like, I really can't imagine anyone else playing that particular role because he's basically playing himself first.
Yeah.
He's not really acting.
You've got more of the patented Seth Rogen laugh in this than you did in 40-Year-Old Virgin. So yeah, you really kind of get, I'll say the stereotypical Seth Rogen comes from Knocked Up.
Yeah, and this was his first lead. This was the first movie that he had a leading role in. So it allowed him to show, a little bit more of his range. Granted, it is what it is at the time. Seth Rogen has actually developed into a very nice actor over time, but he's still the same. You know what you're getting when you see Seth Rogen. Just like 40-Year-Old Virgin, though, his roommates have a fun dynamic together. Jason Segel, Martin Starr, Jay Baruchel, like their interactions together are just fun to watch.
And they all have very distinct personalities among him, Jonah Hill included. Like, you have them all making fun of Martin Starr with the beard bat and just all the jokes. That is a gold mine of jokes. You have Jay Baruchel, who's this very kind of sensitive, I'll say empathic kid. Jason Segel as this kind of Casanova or faux Casanova type, especially hitting on Leslie Mann's character the whole time. And yeah, Jonah Hill being early Jonah Hill too. So I think that is a strong group there. I also do like the precursor of Leslie Mann and Paul Rudd's characters that lead ultimately to This Is 40 down the line. And then you also have Maude and Iris Apatow as the kids. It won't be the last time we see the pair of them as characters' children in these movies. But yeah, really strong film. Again, some datedness, but I think it is ultimately very sweet. And going back to Seth Rogen, there's a scene when she is giving birth and Ken Jeong's character as I'll say the backup doctor is giving Katherine Heigl's character a hard time, and he pulls him out in the office and has a very touching moment that I think really kind of culminates where this film ends, that really is just a strong performance and kind of shows you the chops that Seth Rogen can have as an actor.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And one of the things that they did in this movie that I thought was absolutely brilliant, which I think can tie into where we're going to go in a little bit, is Judd Apatow knew their release date from the get-go, and he knew that it was coming out 2 weeks after Spider-Man 3, and they kept going to the theater to see Spider-Man 3 jokes, and we were in theaters at the same time. It was pretty brilliant, honestly.
That's incredible. That is an incredible fun fact. No, I did not know that, so thank you for sharing. I will look at that movie differently the next time I watch it. And yeah, I mean, last little thing, I'm not this big Katherine Heigl stan, but like, I think she's been treated very poorly by Hollywood, and this movie shows that she can lead a film, a comedy, whatever you want. I think she is a good actress and deserves to work more, because I liked what she did in Knocked Up alongside Seth Rogen.
Absolutely.
The third film we want to talk about, jumping ahead another 2 years, is the Adam Sandler led Funny People. And this is where we're getting more into not straying away from the funny, despite what the title is of the movie, but getting more into the midlife crises, the existential examinations of comedians, of people, of families, and probably at a point in Apatow's life now that he's having a family where his kids are getting older and, you know, his life is changing, that it's kind of a natural exploration. And we've seen Adam Sandler do a lot of great stuff and delving into more serious stuff, especially I think probably prior to this, you got Punch Drunk Love, and then some other films that came after this that are extremely good. But yeah, this is definitely the first kind of deviation away from what I'd say are the straight up comedies.
Yeah, and this is one that was very unique at the time. There was two movies that I saw that came out right around the same time. It's this and Adventureland, you know, obviously different movies, that had trailers that led you to believe their movies were going to be full-blown comedies, and then you go see the movies and they really aren't. And as weird as it is to say that they're dramedies, almost about like coming of age, but as an adult, like dealing with your age as an adult. This wasn't. I think the first watch on this with the expectation, especially with that cast, was a little jarring at first.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, this is not exactly what I expected whatsoever. You got Sandler does actually hold this movie very well, but like what we were talking about with Steve Carell in 40-Year-Old Virgin and Seth Rogen in Knocked Up, it's a little tougher to root for him throughout the whole movie.
Oh, yeah. No, Adam Sandler's character is an asshole. Like, he is not a good guy. And it really isn't until the end, the last scene, where you finally kind of warm up to him. Whereas Seth Rogen, I think, is definitely, while he still has some growing up to do, he has much more maturity than he does in other films. He just kind of is letting life keep him stuck rather than actually mature. It's not that he's not mature. He's just afraid to move to the next steps in his life.
Absolutely. And the whole premise of this movie where he becomes Sandler's, you know, his writer and, you know, his warm-up act worked well. It's a very interesting concept, but then they bring in the whole cancer subplot and they're throwing a lot at you that the movie becomes surprisingly heavy.
Oh yeah,
that in ways that you really didn't see. And then you have Leslie Mann, of course she shows up,
naturally,
you know, as the lost love. And Sandler does it, you know, Sandler over time, especially if you fast forward like 10-15 years, has become a very solid dramatic actor. But extremely. This was only, I think you're right, he had Punch Drunk Love. See, this is really only his second attempt.
Spanglish might have been before this. I don't recall offhand.
Yeah, it was. Spanglish was. So third attempt. He still, you know, has his Adam Sandler isms, which he's never going to drop.
No.
But this movie allowed him to at least attempt something different. I like where the idea was. This was the first Apatow movie, which is something that becomes a growing trend that I felt was bloated.
It's a long movie. It's a long movie. I think Eric Bana did fine in the role he was asked. I don't even know if we needed to see the husband, though. It felt like it added, you know, a hat on a hat with what we were going through. I felt like we didn't need to see it, and just knowing that she was married was enough to add, you know, all of that conflict. I did like the dynamic between Seth Rogen and his roommates, Jonah Hill and Jason Schwartzman.
Right.
One thing that I was very much noticed in this movie, though, was it had a very great soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the soundtrack in this movie. I liked how it kind of, there was that part where Adam Sandler hires Seth Rogen's character to write jokes for the first time for this MySpace event, to tell you when this movie came out. Yep. And you have James Taylor singing in the background, and then it goes to him there, and then James Taylor unintentionally steals one of their jokes, which I thought was a great moment. But yeah, and you know, I liked all the moments with like the little bit of stand-up showing all these different comedians, Aziz Ansari, Aubrey Plaza's characters. And
great.
So, and I liked all the shitting on the Jason Schwartzman sitcom, what Yo Teach, I think was what it was called.
Yeah, Yo Teach.
And just them shitting on that the whole time, because like even for a fake sitcom, it looked bad, just the bits they showed.
Oh yeah. But like I never saw like the DVD or something, but I wonder if they on the bonus features they like put together like an episode or something. That would have
Oh,
been
that'd be great.
glorious.
That'd been so good. Yeah, there is a good movie in there. I felt like, yeah, it just not to say it's bad, but it
Okay.
could have been tightened up.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to our last film. We're jumping ahead a little bit longer to 2015 to Trainwreck. This felt like kind of a return to form for Judd Apatow to me. Not that some of the ones before this were bad per se, but this felt like we were really getting a good comedy. This is, and at the time, it was probably one of the better comedies that had been out just in general in some time.
Yeah, there was a lull in comedies in the 20 teens, and Trainwreck hit what was it 2015 if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And yeah, it was also another chance where it was a female led one, so he flipped the script a little bit. You know, you saw it from the other perspective. Amy Schumer nails this role, I think.
Oh yeah,
perfect vehicle for her.
I was never a big fan, and I would say I'm not a big fan of her stand up. Just jokes aren't for me. I don't think she's, not to say she isn't talented, just not for me, but I really enjoyed Trainwreck. I thought she was great in it. I thought really from start to finish, the cast, the supporting cast, everything was really pretty damn good. Bill Hader as the love interest, I thought was inspired choice. LeBron James as his friend. Brie Larson as I'm just naming characters now, but
John Cena is the one that stood out to me.
John Cena is great.
Out of nowhere. Who thought at that point in time that to get that performance from John Cena?
Kind of a precursor to Peacemaker, like the role we get in Peacemaker. Oh, a very, very different performance from Tilda Swinton as her boss. I don't want to say your standard rom-com because it definitely focused more on the com than the rom. I'd say, at least as far as traditional rom-coms go. But yeah, no, just a lot of good jokes, a lot of heart, a lot of, you definitely sympathized with Amy Schumer's character, especially going through the issues that she and Brie Larson's character going with their dad who had MS. Yeah, no, and really, it felt like I don't want to say Judd Apatow is back, but it was a reversion to the comedies that really made him a name.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Bill Hader. Bill Hader is one of the easiest characters to root for that he's ever written.
Oh, yeah. Very endearing. I mean, we at this point we had seen Bill Hader as these weird characters in SNL. So to see him as this affable doctor, just love interest who is not the wacky one, I thought was extremely inspired.
And this is also, I mentioned with John Cena, this is Bill Hader too. You know, a good chance to see what he had to offer outside of what was his comfort zone at the time. He wasn't doing anything too crazy. He was keeping the film grounded, and he did an excellent job of it.
This movie was less offensive as far as some of the dated jokes we had. Still some, but I think it worked more in the movie's favor in that they were more commented on. They weren't just said and then left alone. They were said by asshole characters, and then Amy Schumer or a different character kind of gave a side eye or like commented on them, which I think is a little more which is better form than what we'd gotten in some earlier films. So less bothered by those compared to the early aughts there, but really another really, really good film. Though I can't say anything after that I've really loved from Apatow. I don't know about you, but
I watched the what was the King of Staten Island once.
Oh yeah.
I kind of forgot about it almost immediately.
Did not hear great things about The Bubble.
Yeah, I never watched it, so
no. But probably a good way to transition to our second segment, our fantastic castings. Here, each of us will cast the four main members of the Fantastic Four: Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, and their nemesis, Doctor Doom, with an actor or actress Apatow has worked with previously and who has not had a major role in the MCU. Mike, as our guest, you have the honor of sharing your cast first.
So I went back and forth with my Reed and my Doom as to which one I wanted in which role, but I came to a conclusion. So my Reed, I decided to go with John Cena. My Sue Storm, Judd Apatow just can't control himself, so it's going to be one of his daughters, so it's going to be Maude Apatow. I put for Johnny Storm, I did go with Pete Davidson, who we worked with on King of Staten Island. For Ben Grimm, the obvious choice, I think, here was Seth Rogen. I took the low-hanging fruit on that one. And going back to who I was just speaking about, for Victor, I'm going with Bill Hader.
Yeah, seeing your cast when you sent it to me, I was like, well, damn, crap, shit. You just kept taking people that I had ideas for. Not to say that it's a bad thing, but like I had to do some major readjustments when I was thinking about my cast because, again, as our guest, you get first dibs.
Right.
But I think I do wonder if we're going in similar directions with our pitches now. But before we get into those, for my cast, for Reed Richards, I went with an actor who had a small bit part in Knocked Up as the male nurse, Adam Scott.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
I think I think he'd be a great Reed Richards, especially with some of the more serious stuff we've seen him doing, like Severance and other shows. I'm sticking with Knocked Up for my Sue Storm and going with their lead, Katherine Heigl. I can't preach about giving her more work and then not casting her as my Sue Storm. For Johnny Storm, Pete Davidson was the one I really wanted, but
it seems like the most obvious choice out of anybody.
Yeah. Oh, from the Judd Apatow filmography, yeah, that would have been a perfect fit. But I went with someone who I really like, especially in some of his current TV shows. He was in 2015's Trainwreck at the beginning of the film. He's also currently on Apple TV's The Big Door Prize and Max's The Other Two, and that's Josh Segarra.
Nice.
I think he is an underappreciated comedic actor. I think he does such good work, even though he's usually kind of a side character. Hopefully now this might be a part that can kind of push him into just a little more stardom, but I think he is a great comedic actor and a great actor in general. For Ben Grimm, I'm probably going with the second obvious choice behind Seth Rogen, and that's Adam Sandler. Yep. I feel like with what we've seen from Apatow, with both the comedy and the, I'll say, midlife examinations, Adam Sandler seems very fitting to be a Ben Grimm.
Yeah.
For Von Doom, I'm going with someone who has been joked about being the villain a couple times, both in Funny People and in, I believe, Knocked Up. His name was name dropped as a villain, Eric Bana. And then I have a couple of other people cast, but we'll get there when we get to the pitches. But before we do our pitches, I do have a couple of questions. Yeah. First, Mike, is your film an origin film?
No.
Mine is not either. Secondly, is your film part of the MCU?
Yes.
Mine could be. It's not inherently tied to the greater MCU, but these characters certainly could fit in some capacity to the MCU.
So mine, as I'll get into, has to take place in the MCU for a reason. I'm not necessarily saying that these characters will continue in the story of the other, we'll go into the other characters' stories, but there's a reason that it does take place in the MCU.
Well, why wait? Let's get right into your pitches. And again, as our guest, you get honors of going first.
So the movie is going to start in 2022. So it is 4 years after the blip. So it's going to start with the Fantastic Four in counseling with their counselor, Leslie Mann, obviously. And Victor Von Doom has been snapped with the blip. So they have to deal with life without Dr. Doom. So they basically have had their whole existence where they've been, basically trying to deal with their past lives where they were, not their past lives, but their more recent lives where they were, they were superheroes. And all of a sudden, they don't need to do that anymore because Victor Von Doom has been snapped out of existence. And then while they are in their therapy session is when the second snap happens and all of a sudden Von Doom is back. So this whole movie is going to be with them being a Judd Apatow movie, is going to be with them having their personal crises, first of not having to be superheroes, but then immediately having to go back to that life after several years of not having done it. With John Cena as the lead, having seen, what he's done in Peacemaker, obviously I wanted to flip the script and give him the actual lead role of the protagonist, obviously. But the four characters now are going to be having basically done what a lot of us did during quarantine, which was just sit around and do nothing and then readjust their lifestyle. It's not necessarily refining their powers, because they all have had them from the get-go, but they have to use them again and use them in a way that is not going to be problematic to the world, such as things that happen with Sokovia. So they are going to have to reevaluate their stance as the Fantastic Four. And meanwhile, Victor Von Doom is going to come back to a completely different world So you're going to see from his perspective. Well, this is I just what happened. I've disappeared for 5 years. I come back, and this is the whole new world for him as well. This is why I really liked putting Bill Hader in this role. He's going to be able to almost like, if you remember Megamind, in a way, putting a little bit of Megamind into Victor Von Doom. It can be a little bit, he can put his quirkiness into it slightly, but I think we're going to see a menacing side of Bill Hader, who is just confused, a fish out of water, and wants to reclaim what was once his. And this will lead into, obviously, they will eventually go into their big conflict. But being that it's Judd Apatow, it's going to be about an hour and 45 minutes, mostly of dialogue, for a 10-minute action sequence at the end, and then another half hour at the end of dialogue. But when it comes to the MCU, the story definitely can. There can easily be an end credit sequence where they would be confronted by Nick Fury or perhaps one of the X-Men at this point, and then there's no way that they outright defeat Doom in this, because this is basically Doom's introduction into the greater scheme of things, because you're not going one and done on Doom at this point. There's no way that you can do that. I think we've learned from our mistakes in the past on that. I do like the idea of Bill Hader as Doom being able to do an Apatow monologue as a villain. I think that would be just juicy, and he would eat that up. The movie definitely would have a prominent role for, I think, of the four Fantastic Four, it would be Johnny Storm, who would get the meatiest part, because you do have Pete Davidson. You don't want to waste that. John Cena and Maude Apatow, and Rogan's going to be there to be Rogan. It's pretty straightforward. This is easily, while it's not an introduction story, because they are going to start immediately as the Fantastic Four, there can be flashbacks, obviously, with the sequence of them, reevaluating their powers. You can flash back and see how they've established themselves as the Fantastic Four. But as a whole, this is pretty much a lead-in film, either to a sequel that's going to have bigger stakes or into the MCU.
I'm on board. I think that sounds great. And again, yeah, it's strange thinking about Apatow doing a superhero film in general, but there's so much family drama that's ripe for the telling with the Fantastic Four that I think of the heroes to tell, for Apatow to tell a story, they seem fitting, and that's why I was excited to do a pitch myself. When you kept talking about Bill Hader as Doom, I kept getting strong Barry vibes as well. So I think definitely could tap into some of what he did with Barry into being Dr. Doom. But yeah, no, I thought that was great.
If you think back to his role in Adventureland, the one scene where he snaps on the guy who is chasing after Jesse Eisenberg, you see him there go full maniacal, and I could see him in a monologue going into that, and it would work really well, actually.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Again, like I say all the time, though, it's like, it sucks that we all come up with these great, incredible, fun pitches, and we're never going to see them actually come to life. But, at least we have the dream.
The what if.
Exactly, the what ifs. So I think we went in kind of parallel lines here, not exactly the same, but my film, which I'm not actually calling, this is the Fantastic 40. that's kind of just the general vibe I want to go with. Or you could call it Fantastic People, one or the other, something along those lines. But this is going to take place after what I would imagine Secret Wars might be in the MCU. And we're dealing with universal incursions, universes crashing into each other, multiverses mixing and changing and whatnot. And without going into too great a detail, I kind of imagine the story where at the end of a previous film, maybe a big event film, the Fantastic Four and their family, including Franklin and Valeria Richards, played respectively by Evan Brinkman, who was the little kid Alistair in Trainwreck, and Iris Apatow, who I would have cast Maude, but you went ahead and cast Maude, so I'll cast Iris Apatow as Valeria Richards, get essentially not lost, but transported to a different universe that just happens where the Fantastic Four, except for Sue, had been killed off. And in this universe, Doom is not such a villain. He is actually the new hero. And Sue and Doom hook up and have a Valeria Doom, who is going to be played by Maria Baklova, who was in The Bubble, was also in Borat, also in Bodies, 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 which is very good if you've never seen Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I don't have a full full treatment out for this, but I kind of just imagine this family drama, dramedy, if you will, about one, Reed and Sue just in constant dispute over whether they should just accept their lives here on this in this new multiversal place or trying to get back. You have Valeria, both the Valerias in conflict with each other, essentially being the same person but also different people. So like these weird twins. You have also the conflict between, oh, and I forgot to mention the Sue that is with Eric Bana, Dr. Doom, is Leslie Mann.
How can it not be?
Right, right. So just the weird dynamics between Reed and Sue and Sue and Sue and Sue and Doom and Reed and Sue and just that weird love quadrangle and just the mistrust that is placed with Reed and Doom, considering him a bad guy when all he's ever known is him as an antagonist in his life, and like thinking that maybe he had something to do with their Fantastic Four going away to maybe get to Sue or something. So just all these interpersonal relationships between these characters. And ultimately, I feel like this would lead to some sort of botched hero moment where the Fantastic Four and Doom conflict trying to save people, but because civilization as we know it don't know these new Fantastic Four members, side with Doom, which causes more conflict and more issues between them. I haven't quite figured out how I'd nail the ending yet, but I feel like there would certainly be some resolution, and potentially whether it ends there and they make their way back, or it leads to a sequel where they find a way to potentially get back, and that's what the premise of the next film is. I just like the idea of these characters with their own interfamily and then kind of their doppelganger struggles, dealing with it after this big, massive incursion event. So we go from this big event in a previous film to this very small interpersonal story about this family dynamic. And I also think with Johnny, Josh Segura's Johnny, he's probably just living up, being this quote unquote resurrected but not resurrected hero, whereas Adam Sandler's Ben Grimm lost everything. Like his family wasn't able to come back with him. He's feeling alone because this family's dealing with their own things. He's trying to keep the team together but not doing a great job at it, so he's struggling with that among still being the thing. So those are just kind of the threads I envision. I imagine it being a little too long because we are dealing with all these characters' issues, but yeah, that's where I see it going, is kind of like you said, a lot more dialogue driven, interpersonal. Didn't talk a lot about the comedy. There would be comedic moments in here, and I think it would be driven more again by the upbeatness of Josh Segura as Johnny Storm and kind of the sad sack nature, kind of anger erupting Adam Sandler. But yeah, definitely we're leaning more towards This Is 40 funny people vibe than we are some of the comedies we talked about.
I love the concept of the Doom being kind of viewed suddenly as a hero. It's almost like the Mysterio aspect from Far From Home. Yeah. However, while he's still alive, I like that.
Right, and that's the thing though. I don't necessarily. The point wouldn't be to necessarily. While the audience would have a natural distrust of Doom, nothing he actually does in the movie should lead you to distrust him, which I think also would play up how Reed's feeling. You're like, you have a natural tendency to want to side with Reed, but come the climax of the movie, you might be like, he's actually not. He's actually been this good guy this whole time. So kind of also twisting our audience expectations on who Doom is too in this incurred universe.
Love it.
Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up. We've done our casts, we've done our pitches for a Judd Apatow Fantastic Four film. I certainly hope, and I hope Mike hopes, that you, the listeners, enjoyed our exploration into these what-if scenarios. We do want to make a special note that the Fantastic Four podcast is hosted for free on Spotify, formerly known as Anchor, and we encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check it out. It really is a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you are listening on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and commenting with who your Judd Apatow cast would be, on what your thought of our lists and pitches were, and on which director you might want to see next. I want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for the fantastic theme music they created for us, and I certainly want to thank you, Mike, for being our guest today.
Absolutely.
We talked a little bit about what the show, but please tell our listeners where you can be found, where what the show can be found. If you have a schedule, what's going on with what the show.
Sure. So what the show, its regular airtime is 10 o'clock Eastern on Wednesday nights. It occasionally fluctuates. Once in a while, we'll do something on a different night. Again, it's hosted by myself, AJ Lancaster, Justin the Juice, and my wife, Bethany Deacon. Dan has been on twice recently, actually. Those of you who saw him on a few weeks ago, he came on as a solo guest. And we recently also just did a Ted Lasso tier ranking, which you definitely need to check out because we had a lot of fun doing that.
We love Ted Lasso.
Yeah, Ted Lasso is the best. That would be a very interesting one. Bill Lawrence.
I literally have thought about that. So be on the lookout eventually for what if Bill Lawrence did a Fantastic Four TV show?
I would absolutely love to. I please make that one. I will be listening for certain on that one.
Perfect.
So yeah, what the show, we are Wednesday nights. I also can be found on Tuesday nights. It's every other week right now, but come football season, you can find me every week on the Notorious by Chance channel with Chance Ellison and Jacob London on Left Side, Strong Side, which is an NFL recap show. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
As a Bears fan, Mike, I can certainly empathize with your struggle as a Jets fan.
My best man at my wedding is a lifelong suffering Bears fan. I watched that Super Bowl with him. It was the highest of highs, suddenly followed by the lowest of lows. Devin Hester's opening kickoff touchdown was the happiest I think I've ever seen him. And then it just went downhill from there.
Yep. Though I feel less empathetic now that you have Aaron Rodgers on your team.
Everyone's going to feel less empathetic. We're not the underdogs and multiple losers anymore. We have a target on our backs.
Yeah, no, yeah. So if you weren't my guest, I would be saying like, I hope you lose every game. But since you're my guest, I won't say that. But there you have it. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm Dan Bettenhausen, and on behalf of our guest Mike Deacon, we hope you all stay fantastic.